Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you are. Welcome to this program. Tonight, I would like to talk about an issue, one of the many reasons why Africa has failed to develop. And the issue there is Africa exports raw resources with no value added. And that is not helping the continent to develop and to prosper. I'll just play this video and then I'll ask my guests to comment on it, and then we'll start the discussion. Just hang on, please.
Which African countries exported the largest volumes of natural resources annually, generating the most wealth from its abundant reserves? At number 10 is Zimbabwe, exporting $9.77 billion in natural resources. At number 9 is Gabon, exporting $10.92 billion in natural resources. At number 8 is the Democratic Republic of Congo, exporting $13.69 billion in natural resources. At number 7 is Ghana, exporting $14.97 billion in natural resources. At number 6 is Egypt, exporting $23.22 billion in natural resources. At number 5 is Libya, exporting $27.03 billion in natural resources. At number 4 is Angola, exporting $32.04 billion in natural resources. At number 3 is Algeria, exporting $38.70 billion in natural resources. At number 2 is Nigeria, exporting $52.69 billion in natural resources. And at number 1 is South Africa, exporting
$124.96 billion. Welcome to this program, Benjamin. What are your views?
Good evening. Thank you for having me on your program. And to our viewers, thank you for joining us. I would like to. I'm actually shocked with the figures. Let me say, these are huge figures. I mean, we are talking of billions and billions of dollars, in revenue from selling natural resources. And then you sometimes wonder, why is Africa lagging? Why is Africa not developing? Why is Africa not moving forward? And I think most of us can agree it all comes down to corruption. Where are these monies going to? I think this is one of the points that we must deal with to try and have some of these, those that are in power or those that handle these finances to be accountable, so that we can be able to trace and account for each and every cent that the country is making in these revenues. Because when you look at Africa, honestly, we are always beggars from other countries. You hear we are being given so much in terms of donations, but yet we raise so much.
So you are impressed with the figures that we are exporting so much, yeah?
Yes.
Well, that is an interesting aspect. Corruption is definitely a serious problem. But in this particular case, the corruption will also entail maybe that corruption is everywhere. In this case, yes, not only in the exports, because these are exported natural resources. Yeah. So corruption will come into it. But there is also another interesting aspect here, that these large amounts are actually exported natural resources. In other words, there's no value added. You're just digging the mineral and selling it. They've not processed it in any way. Isn't that another problem here?
Yes, that's true. I mean, value adding value to whatever you're selling is the best way going forward. I mean, it's obvious if you were to dig iron ore and sell iron ore in its raw form, you are not going to get much, but process it and add value to it, you are going to make an additional, income out of it. So for that, I think this is where you find our governments, as our African governments, are lacking in that department to say, why don't you add value before you sell some of these things? Uh, I could understand maybe some minerals are difficult for you to add value to them, but surely most of them by now you should be able to process your minerals. I don't see any reason why they are selling them in raw form. I don't have an excuse for them, and I'm sure they don't have a meaningful excuse either.
I think the article actually would have done more justice to that subject if they had given us an analysis of, take for instance, the case of South Africa exporting 124.96 billion US dollars in raw resources. It would have been interesting. What is that compared to the total export for South Africa? In other words, South Africa exports things like manufactured cars because they've got industries, and they do add value to some of their resources like diamonds. They've got factories that do manufacture jewelry and so forth. So it would have been interesting in this particular case, whereas Zimbabwe exports nearly 10 billion US dollars. And of that, how does that compare with the total exports? What else do we export?
Yeah, I agree. If there was more statistics to it, but my point is, when you compare South Africa with Zimbabwe, of course South Africa is making more in terms of their resources, like what it's the video is saying, but you compare the two countries, you tend to ask yourself, and the population density, of course, you tend to ask yourself, where is Zimbabwe? Where, where is Zimbabwe's money going to? Because I mean, for sure, we know the Reserve Bank is empty. You know, there's no medicines. They, these are some of the things that the list is endless. Where is the money going to? And I could say for most African countries that are mentioned in here, where is their money is going to? Because their people are suffering.
Which African countries exported the largest volumes of natural resources annually, generating the most wealth from its abundant reserves? At number 10 is Zimbabwe.
Well, the point that the article is making there is that we are generating so many billions in selling natural resources. I agree that the question also has got to be asked: how are we using those resources? How is that $10 billion used? But I think the point still remains, and which I think is an issue that we must discuss, the point still remains that in this particular case, take the case of Zimbabwe, for instance, come back to Zimbabwe. Of the nearly $10 billion in export, I believe that most of it is actually in raw resources. We are exporting very little else because our industries have all but collapsed. We used to have, we were talking earlier on of iron ore. We used to have Cisco Steel. It was producing steel and it was selling it in the region and beyond. We used to have big companies that were adding value like Zimalloys, that were adding value to our minerals. But some of those have either considerably reduced their activities, or some of them, like Cisco Steel, have completely closed down. So that our exports now is purely the natural resources, the minerals mostly. And that is a serious problem. So I think that point has got to be made. In this particular case, this ranking, I think it will be totally different if you looked at how does that natural resources being exported compared to the total resources that, total export that the country is making.
Yes, I agree with you on that. I mean, our factories and our industries that used to add value, I mean, the list is endless. When you talk of Cisco Steel, you talk of Lancashire Steel, you talk of all those, big companies that have since, packed up, or they have since collapsed. And you are right to say, I mean, we know how the current mining is being done in Zimbabwe, where it's basically it's just being smelted and then off to China, and they will do whatever the value adding there and bring it back, and we'll be buying the same material at double the price. So this is how it is. It's unfortunate that we have to go through such a process, but I think it's of no excuse in terms for our government to fail to add value to some of these minerals. Surely you can't be selling them continuously for peanuts, because you cannot put buildings and start processing your own resources and get more for your people. So I think it's just shooting themselves in the foot at the end of the day, selling cheap and buying more expensive.
Yeah, one of the reasons why is it comes back to what you were talking about earlier on. Of course, is corruption and mismanagement and so forth. In a country, in a pariah state, how many companies would want to invest in a country whose political future is so uncertain? You've got rigged elections. It's always in a turmoil, because when you're looking at investing in a company like Cisco Steel, that is long term. You are not looking at investing money into smelting, making steel for just 5 years or 10 years. You've got to look at long term. But when you're talking of a country like Zimbabwe, where there's so much corruption, you invest that money, and then the politicians would want to have a cut of it, and we are forever under pressure to give them a cut. No one would want to invest in a country like that. So we end up with a situation where we are in, where we are selling our raw materials. That's because that's the only thing we can sell. The Chinese would invest in a lithium smelting plant, but even they know that Zimbabwe is so unstable. You really don't want to make a $1 billion investment in a country where if it's successful, you'll be always under pressure from the politicians for a cut, or it's so unstable that you don't know. I mean, right now we are looking at the serious infighting within ZANU-PF for power. And if you happen to support the wrong side, you could find yourself, your company is being taken over. This is the reality with countries like Zimbabwe. Like I said, I think if we were to look at the nearly $10 billion in export, and were to compare it with South Africa, it's $124 billion in exporting raw materials, I would not be surprised at all to find that what we are earning in exports of raw materials is way above other countries like South Africa. They are manufacturing things. They've got working industries. Yes, some of them have taken a hammering since ANC came into power, but still South Africa is exporting. I mean, in Zimbabwe, for instance, we are importing most of the processed goods from South Africa, even to the extent of importing milk and basic agricultural produce that we used to produce ourselves. This is the tragedy of Zimbabwe. So this list, that is one of my complaints with this list. This list does not look at the size of your exports in terms of raw material compared to the total exports, raw materials plus manufactured or semi-processed goods.
Or you would have preferred if the figure had to do with the volume that they're actually shipping out, right?
Yeah, I mean, it'll give you a feel of the seriousness of our problem. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
That exporting raw material, if, for instance, you're exporting raw materials, but it is 5% of your total exports, yeah, it's much better than a country that is exporting 90% of its exports is raw materials and processed goods, yeah? And even if the figure tends to be your exports for somebody who is exporting 5%, like South Africa, it's only 5% of their total exports. In Zimbabwe, although we are exporting a lot less, it's 95%. That's when you realize, why are you exporting so much without even adding any value to it?
Yeah, I mean, it could be said that Zimbabwe obviously is exporting more only to get less out of it, because they are only selling it in its natural form. Had they been adding value to it, they should be getting maybe, who knows, maybe 4 or 5 times more. That is just the unfortunate thing that we find that we are facing as a country. Like I was saying, that the government has got no excuse if they are investing for the future. Like for now, there is this year 2030 upper middle income. I'm sure this is how you get to that stage, by investing in the future. But nothing has been done, so I don't see any excuse why Zimbabwe cannot start adding value to their resources that are they are selling, and at least not sell as raw material, but semi-finished goods.
Yeah. Well, the excuse is well, it's not really an excuse, but the reality is there that actually, I think at one time, if we were to compare to Zimbabwe before independence or soon after independence, when our industries, so many of our industries were functioning, I would venture to say we did not export so much in raw materials, or at least the comparison between raw material and value added would have been totally different. Now we are concentrating on just exporting raw materials because we've killed all our industries. We have even killed off our own agricultural sector, which used to be a big foreign currency earner. Yes, we did not export cigarettes, processed cigarettes, but selling tobacco ended up. Now some of those industries, particularly the flour industry, the fruit industry, and so forth, have all but collapsed since ZANU-PF took over the farms. So our export would have been even bigger if we were exporting as much of the agricultural produce as we used to. So that is the tragedy. I don't know whether you'd want to give your closing remarks there, Ben.
Oh, thank you. So for my closing remarks, I would say, it's I don't see any valid excuse that the government of Zimbabwe can give as to why they are not able to add value. Even if investors are not willing to invest, they as a government, they should. I mean, if they're thinking long term, as they are saying that they have a vision 2030, this is the one thing that they must should be making sure of, that they try and add value to the raw materials that they're selling. That's also creating employment for the people. So them selling in raw form, and I bet it's more in terms of tonnage or in weight that you have to sell for you to get to the same figure that other countries probably are enjoying. It's quite sad to see that we are actually losing our resources just because we are not thinking beyond our pockets, and corruption is so rampant, and it's actually showing in some of these things, that even if we ask to say, then if you are exporting so much with the population of Zimbabwe that is so small per year, why are our citizens suffering? That's my question that I would leave each and every one of us.
Thank you very much, Benjamin. And to the listeners, thank you very much for joining us tonight, and have a good day.
Thank you. Good night.